You're listening to The Wild Initiative Podcast Network. Learn more and check out all the shows at thewildinitiative.com.
You're listening to the Untamed podcast, where we talk all things fishing, conservation, and the outdoors. Today on the show, I'm joined by Palmer Henson, who's trying to see how many native brook trout streams in Georgia he can find. All right, welcome to episode number 3 of the Fish Untamed podcast. Today I'm talking to Palmer Henson. Palmer and I got connected couple months back when he had reached out to me to share with me a personal project he'd been working on for the past couple years and is still working on, where he's trying to find as many native brook trout streams as he can in Georgia. Of course, that immediately piqued my interest as someone who really enjoys fishing for brook trout but doesn't get to fish for native brook trout. I was just immediately interested in hearing his insights and experiences, fishing these streams that rarely see any angling pressure in the mountains of Georgia. So super interesting conversation, completely outside my wheelhouse. So I was soaking it all up. Apologies though, we did have some microphone issues kind of halfway through the recording. So if you hear any static, that's what that is. But highly encourage you to stick it out through that static, just because Palmer's got so many good stories and insights that well worth sticking it out to the end. So without further ado, here is my chat with Palmer Henson. Hey, Palmer, how's it going?
It's going great. How are you, Katie?
Pretty good. Thanks for hopping on today.
I feel honored to be joining you.
I think we have a lot to talk about. We've spoken once before on the phone, just kind of hashing things out, and I remember having to kind of stop you because we were already getting into things that I wanted to say for this conversation. So I'm excited to hear what you have to say. Just as a little background, you and I crossed paths because you came across Fish Untamed and reached out, and we've been kind of in contact since then. And then you had mentioned that you are in this, what is it, a 4-year process, I think, of trying to find as many native brook trout streams in Georgia as you can, and that just sounds like the coolest project I've heard of.
Yeah, it is an undetermined length. I'm probably 3 years into it and have still a good long way to go. So it's definitely long term, but lots of fun.
So I want to get a little background because I know I want to get into all the brook trout stuff, but when I sent over the kind of bio for you to fill out, you filled out even more than I was expecting to get, and that just took me down a bunch of other rabbit trails. So first off, I want to hear about Lost Angel fly fishing, because that's kind of how we first got connected, because your Lost Angel fly fishing group seems to be very in line with Fish Untamed's mentality of kind of getting back into the middle of nowhere and chasing fish that don't see people very often. So I want to hear more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Lost Angel, the concept behind it is fly fishers who've left the flock and are out fishing out on the periphery where a few other people are going. Now, in reality, there's not a whole lot to it. It's a fun name, and there's really just 4 of us who think of ourselves as members, with several kind of honorary members. We don't have meetings or dues. There's no benefit to being a member, but it's a fun concept. And when we do fish together, we 100% are trying to get out, past the crowds, whether that's backpacking somewhere or up in, deep in the Georgia mountains, or fishing the backcountry in Yellowstone, whatever it might be.
So how do you know everyone in the group?
Well, one of the members is my brother, and
Okay.
and a good friend of his is another, and then a good friend of mine who's here in Atlanta, who's kind of my local fishing buddy, Jeff Giuliano. So and we do an annual Montana trip my brother and I used to do it with my dad. I think we did 15 years with him, and eventually he passed away. And we've Jeff and Kevin Lane, who's my brother's friend, have kind of filled in from there, and we still do our Montana, which is mostly a Yellowstone trip, but then fish together other places, other times as well.
Are you all based in Georgia?
No, Jeff and I are here, and my brother and Kevin are up in Connecticut.
Okay, quite a
Most
distance.
recently, quite a distance. Yeah. Most recently, my brother's name's Phil. Phil, Kevin, and I fished last week up on Cape Cod. We were fishing for stripers, and it felt pretty back country, even though it's salt water. Fishing small channels among marshes and a really shallow bay, Pleasant Bay up on Cape Cod. So we definitely had the Lost Angel theme going, that we're schoolie striper fishing.
Yeah, it's probably a little different than what you're usually targeting.
It is. It's totally different, but really fun, and caught some great little stripers.
So are all the people in the group kind of on this brook trout journey with you, or is that just a personal project for you?
It's pretty much a personal project. Jeff comes along when he can. He's got I'm sort of a half empty nester. My daughter's off at college, and I've got a stepdaughter who's still at home, but her dad's kind of fully engaged in her life, so he's the one doing the soccer coaching and things like that. So I've got some pretty good latitude on what I do, and my wife is super supportive, letting me head out pretty much every Saturday to go search for brook trout, with the caveat that I'm home by 5 and she doesn't have to listen to it.
That's not that strict.
No, it's pretty good. And Jeff comes along when we can. Usually when Jeff's going to be with me, we pick some larger streams that he'll generally fish those, and larger is still really small, and I'll head up some of these tiny tributaries and won't force him to beat his way through the brush and rhododendron and things like that.
And it sounds like you do a lot more. Like you said that you have pretty lenient, I guess, permissions to go do whatever you want. It sounds like you do a lot more than just fish, though. You sent over that you trail run and climb and do like ultra marathons. I have to admit,
Yeah,
when you first reached out to me, I was just like, oh, this because you're a lawyer, right?
I'm a banker.
A banker, okay. I was like, oh yeah, this guy just is a hobby fisherman and just wants to reach out and make connections. And then I saw what all you do, and I was like, holy crap, this is
Yeah,
way more intense than I expected.
I kind of got to fishing more from the like outdoor athlete aspect, rather than the more traditional kind of hunting outdoorsman path. I growing up, my dad's two favorite pastimes were fishing, and including a lot of fly fishing, and bird watching, which made for a super painful childhood, having to walk slowly and quietly through woods instead of running free. The exact opposite of what I wanted to be doing. But so I grew up exposed to a lot of fishing, though honestly, I don't think my dad really had the patience to teach my brother and I how to fly fish, and we didn't have the patience to learn. So we spent a lot more time spin casting, like many kids do.
Hmm.
But also did other sports. In high school, I played soccer, and then I grew up in New York, north of New York City, far enough north that we had a ski team. So in the winter, I skied, I raced slalom, and in the summer, mostly raced sailboats and fished. And I spent, from when I was a little kid up until I was in my kind of mid 30s, and I'm almost 60 now. So one of the reasons I've got a lot of things on my plate is I've just been at it for a really long time. I spent years and years racing sailboats really hard. Got really close to winning some national championships and things like that. And then I got married, and it was hard to kind of keep up that pace there. And
Hmm.
I was getting a little burnout anyway. And I had started doing some rock climbing. So I spent probably I don't know, it was almost 15 years doing tons of rock climbing, but then also running a lot and doing a lot of trail running along with rock climbing. Those two fit together really well. Uh, and then eventually I started doing my when my daughter was born, when she was really young, even as young as 2 years old, my friends and I would bring her rock climbing, and she'd hang out at the bottom of the cliffs and play in the dirt and chase lizards and stuff like that while we climbed. And then eventually she was old enough, someone would always be on the ground with her. Eventually she was old enough that she could start climbing, and so she would climb with us some, and we would climb. And as she got into her mid-teens, she started playing soccer. So it was hard to cut out every Saturday. I kind of had a hall pass back then too, because I was taking my daughter with me.
Right. Just take her with you and just plop her
Yeah,
down somewhere.
exactly. She has a climb up in North Georgia named after her, but and we would every year take trips out to Yosemite and Canadian Rockies and places like that and climb, and we did some fishing on rest days for climbing. If we were going to be up in the mountains where there were some good trout lakes and streams, we'd fish there too. This has turned into a longer story on this, but then
Oh
did a
no,
lot of
it's
running.
good.
I had a long-term goal of doing qualifying for and running 10 Boston marathons, and it took me 16 years, but I finally did that. Did a bunch of trail running, and then eventually I started doing triathlons. And when my daughter started playing soccer, we didn't climb as much, so I started doing triathlons instead of just running. And I had a good long run there, and was getting burnt out on that too. And it had always known fishing would take kind of a more prominent position in my hobbies as I got older and got burnt out on some of the other sports. And so that was probably 5 years ago. I started fishing more and more. Doing some of the I still run a lot and bike a lot and things, but fishing more and more. So now I'm at the point where pretty much every Saturday I'm heading out somewhere to fish, and more often than not, it's up to the mountains to search for brook trout.
That's interesting because I assumed that you had just been like kind of fishing this whole time. So you took quite a long hiatus from fishing as a kid, kind of got into some of the more active sports, I guess. Not that fly fishing can't be active, but some of the more taxing, I guess,
Yeah,
physically
yeah,
taxing activities, and then just came back to fly fishing.
yeah. That's 100% right. I came back to it, call it 20 years ago. My dad had just retired, and he had a big cancer scare. He had like a 20% chance of surviving, and so he survived. And coming out of that, we were always a really close family and did a lot of vacations together. But my brother, dad, and I hadn't really done much, just the three of us, in forever. So that's when we started heading out to Montana. And and 20 years ago, I literally bought, you know, the Dummy's Guide, one of those yellow guides, the Dummy's Guide to Fly Fishing. And I'd fished a lot, but I kind of had to relearn how to fly fish. Every lesson that I had learned as a kid was long gone. But read a lot. Even when I was doing all those other sports, I was reading a lot about fly fishing. And again, as I say, kind of had it in my mind that eventually I would do a whole lot more of it. And then, 5 or so years ago, I did a big trail run in the Grand Canyon called Rim to Rim to Rim, which was probably the pinnacle of my running career. Not that it was super fast, but it was 45 miles, and each side is like a vertical mile. So it was a
It's
big
quite a
goal,
feat.
and I worked for a long time to build up to that, and had a good solid time. And after that, it was sort of like, okay, I'm gonna start fishing a lot. And Atlanta, I mean, coming from Colorado, you must look at Georgia and scratch your head. Does anyone trout fish in Georgia? But it's a great, kind of hotbed for all kinds of fishing, but including trout fishing. The top, call it 50 miles of Georgia, right underneath the Tennessee and North Carolina borders, or up in the mountains. They've there's 4,000 miles of trout streams, which is, it's probably half what you have in Colorado or a state like Pennsylvania or something like that. But still, it's 4,000 miles is a lot of stream.
Yeah, and
Uh,
you're right in that when I first think of Georgia, that's not what comes to mind. But I feel like in the past, I wouldn't say year or so, I've been hearing a lot more about it. It seems like it's kind of coming into the fly fishing scene the way that Colorado did, years ago, and now it's kind of old news. And it seems like Georgia is kind of the new hot spot to go to. I hear a lot of people talking about going to North Georgia.
yeah, and part of it is we fish all year round, so you can come to North Georgia in the middle of the winter and still have good fishing. And we have a great tailwater too. There's a lake that's called Lake Lanier that's 60 miles north of Atlanta that the water comes out of the lake into the Chattahoochee River, our tailwater at 50 plus or minus degrees all year round. So it has wild brown trout and stocked rainbows and holdover rainbows, and I think there's probably are rainbows that actually spawn and reproduce in it as well. But it's a great tailwater, and that's in the winter they actually stock that all the way down into Atlanta. In the summer, after about 30 or 40 miles, it gets too warm to hold trout. But the first 30 or 40 miles, we've got trout fishing kind of year round.
Now,
And then
what is South Georgia like compared to that? Because I always hear about North Georgia.
Yeah, it's totally. I mean, the trout habitat, except for that tailwater, the trout habitat stops in the first within the first 50 miles coming south of the Tennessee, North Carolina border. So it's just too warm, and the mountains. Atlanta is the very bottom of the Appalachian Mountains. It's called the Piedmont area. So it's starting to flatten out and get too warm. And as you get south of Atlanta, it's flat and hot. And there's all kinds of great warm water fishing, but no, you're well below where they're trout. But the mountains, the mountains are taller than they are in Vermont. I mean, people are shocked when they hear that. It rains a ton. There are sections of the North Georgia mountains, particularly in the northeastern part of the state, where it rains 75 inches a year in a normal year, and which is, I think 75 inches is right about the cutoff for it being a rainforest. It's a little less as you move to the west, but still a good 60 inches, which is nearly twice what, say, Seattle has. So we get lots of rain. It's incredibly lush and dense, and the mountains are super super dense, and the you'll laugh at the elevations. I mean, the higher elevations are 4,000 feet, but most of the trout fishing is kind of 2 to 2.5 in that range. Super low compared to what you have, but for the East Coast, it's it works, and it's for all trout populations, it's the very bottom. North Georgia is the very very bottom of the trout habitat on the East Coast, and the brook trout, it's even fringier. Of the 4,000 miles, there's probably 125 or maybe 150 miles that have native brook trout. So it's real fringy.
Has the fly fishing culture that's kind of developed in the northern areas because of the trout, has that started to leak down into southern Georgia? I know there's no trout down there, but is it a lot of warm water fishing with spin rods, or is that fly fishing culture kind of seeped down into the warm water species as well?
It definitely has, and it's particularly sort of around Atlanta. In the summer, in the that same Chattahoochee River, when it warms up too much, right around Atlanta to hold trout, there are striped bass that migrate upstream into that area, and people, within the city limits of Atlanta in the summer, you can fly fish for stripers. And then the whole, the coastal Georgia, for redfish and other saltwater species, there's tons of fly fishing there. But if you went to just your average bass pond in South Georgia, no one's fly fishing.
Okay.
But we have all kinds of great fly fishing resources, which, when I started getting a little more serious about it, 5 years ago or so, I had all these incredible resources at my disposal. We have, the premier fly shop in the Southeast is called the Fish Hawk. It's a mile and a half from my house. Anytime I want, there's 5 guys standing around who know more about fly fishing than I'll ever know, that I can stop in on and ask questions. And we've got a great guide service that called River Through Atlanta that fishes that whole tailwater section. We've got a Euro nymphing guide who named Big T, who does nothing but teach people how to Euro nymph. I mean, we've got Atlanta's big enough, at 6.5 million people or whatever, that it can support all kinds of great resources. And we also have an awesome airport. So the people in Atlanta travel constantly. We can fly almost anywhere direct with Delta based in Atlanta. So it's a traveling crew. I mean, people are heading out west. They're heading to, down south. Lots of great saltwater destinations. It's a big active community here.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. Isn't Atlanta, I think, the most traveled through airport in the country, or maybe the world? I don't want to say the world because I'm not sure, but I think it might be the most traveled through airport in the country.
Yeah, it's I think it's back and forth between Atlanta and O'Hare. And I think Atlanta is probably leading right now. And then I think maybe Heathrow has a few more people. But yeah, exactly.
It's a hub.
And Delta's a great airline. It's right here, and we can fly literally almost anywhere directly with plenty of options. So it's a traveling group here. But then we have all this great fishing here locally as well.
So how close are you to A, fishing at all, and B, the smaller brook trout streams that you're generally hitting?
So the first part is, I'm 15 minutes from my house. In the summer, I can be fishing for, striped bass, shoal bass, smallmouth, panfish, stuff like that in the Chattahoochee. And then in the winter, 6 months of the year, they stock that, same area with trout. So in the winter, I can fish stocker trout 15 minutes from my house. But to get really up into the true, where you've got wild fish and then native fish, it's, an hour and a half to, the farthest corner of North Georgia, where it's an awesome place for brook trout, is 2.5 hours probably.
Okay.
So I'm getting up, Saturday I'll get up at, 4:15, be out the door by 5, drive 2 or so hours, and then, fish hard and try to be back in the car by 2 or 2:30 or 3 or something.
And is there what kind of land are you accessing there? Is there a national forest in that area, or?
There is. There's the Chattahoochee National Forest is, not quite 1 million acres, and it spreads across North Georgia. And there's for trout, wild and stock trout, there's a lot of trout on private land, but there's a ton of public land also. I mean, that whole Chattahoochee National Forest, and brook trout are almost exclusively on the public land because it's the higher elevations, it's the deeper ravines and things like that. I mean, for brook trout to survive in, this far south, it, generally you've got to have a north facing ravine that's, maybe never been logged. You've hopefully no one stocked it with rainbows, or if they have, there was a barrier falls in there somewhere, and it's, you have to be, generally above about 2,400 feet of elevation, which again, to you it doesn't seem like much, but it's definitely a little bit higher up.
Coming from sea level, I mean, that's still a good deal up from there.
Yeah. So it's definitely a lot of driving, and a lot of, but they're great Forest Service roads. When I started looking for brook trout, I ended up sort of breaking North Georgia into 10 geographic areas, which were largely wildlife management areas, but some were just basically watersheds. And I'll hit one area after another. I mean, that's basically what I've been doing for the last 3 years, just concentrating on one of those geographic areas. And each of those are, call it 20,000 acres or so. The smallest ones, or the ones that have the fewest streams, might have 8 target streams, and the bigger ones are 25 plus. But yeah, it's a lot of driving, a lot of driving on kind of beat up Forest Service roads too.
Yeah, okay, so I have a lot of questions on this brook trout project. I've just been thinking of them as you've been talking, but uh, first off, like, what got you started on this project? What triggered the idea?
So when I started fishing again more seriously, I was trying like all kinds of stuff, and it's all fun. I love to do it all. Whether it's tenkara or Euro nymphing or whatever. Started all these things, but definitely felt drawn to small streams. So I started focusing on the smaller streams in North Georgia just because, I don't know, I just felt drawn to it, and started working my way through there are 2 or 3 fishing guidebooks for North Georgia. Started working my way through one, hitting all these small streams. And then, you know, there's not very many of the streams that get mentioned in the guidebooks as having brook trout, but found one and hit that stream and caught a native Georgia brook trout, and it was fantastic. And if you read some of the online sites and things like that that cover North Georgia, a lot of people have that. They just want to catch a native brook trout is kind of a goal, and so I did that, and then I started looking around and trying to find a few others. And I thought, boy, wouldn't it be great if maybe one day I could find 10, catch brook trout on 10 different streams, and started working towards that. And in the meantime, I had read that article that Zach Matthews has the loneliest brook trout in the world that I'd sent to you. And that definitely kind of sparked my interest that much more. And he describes what it's like down here great in that article. So that got me going, and trying to get to 10 streams got me going. And then, it just kind of morphed into, well, if I can hit 10, can I hit 20? And then I wonder how many brook trout streams there are. And there's a book called Brook Trout in Dixie, which talks about brook trout in all the southern states, West Virginia. It may even start with Maryland and works its way all the way south to Georgia. And I think in that book, it was where I read it, estimated there were maybe as many as 80 streams that have brook trout in Georgia. It only named 1 or 2 of the better known ones, but it had, so that's sort of, well, if I can get 20, and so I started spending all this time online looking at, my Saturday evenings or weekday evenings or whatever. I was just pouring through websites and online searches, trying to find names and finding, I might find a scientific report that talked about it, a 30-year-old genetic study about brook trout in North Georgia, and that report might have a table that listed some the streams they sampled, and then, some of the local Trout Unlimited chapters would do stream projects for brook trout. So I'd pick up those names, and then eventually I organized them into this database and started just working through it. So now there are 160 something streams in the database, of which I've caught brook trout on 74. There are another 45 or so that I've fished and have dismissed as not having brook trout. But I still have a long way to go. And every every so often, as I get deeper into a particular area, more and more streams get added to the list. You're fishing in a wildlife management area and working through the streams there, and you've got some info on some of the streams, but then you're fishing the ones that are similar and have all the right characteristics to be a brook trout stream, and then you see another one that was never in the database, and so you add that to the database and eventually go fish that. So it just kind of has snowballed rather. And then along the way, I met just pure happenstance. I met a guy from the Forest Service. It was a funny story. I was down this remote Forest Service road, hadn't seen anyone all day, which is the normal case. I mean, when I leave my house at 5 a.m, I'm not talking to a human being until I get home at 5
Right.
usually. And so I was heading out at the end of the day, and in the middle of nowhere, there was a sign that said all traffic must stop in half a mile, regular road sign. And, drove a half mile and said, all traffic must stop for a survey. And there was a guy from the Forest Service standing there, and I was the third car that had passed by. He'd been there from 9 to 4. I was the third car that had passed by, and he had just a usage survey, 50 questions on what I was doing. I was spending money in the area and things like that. And so he and I got talking about what I was doing, and he introduced me to another guy at the Forest Service who spent a lot of time with the Department of Natural Resources and their trout biologists, and try to limit on other people. He was spending a ton of time on trout streams. So he and I sat down together one day and kind of compared databases. And he gave me some new ideas. I gave him some streams that he wasn't familiar with and didn't realize held brook trout. But then he introduced me to a biologist at the Department of Natural Resources who I've just recently spent time with. I kind of wanted to get to the point where I had like a really big database before I approached that individual, just because he wasn't going to be very excited about sharing brook trout streams. And I'm not excited about sharing stream names either. It's they're all pretty tenuous and can't handle much pressure. But it was interesting. We sat down together for a couple hours, and he said, he was relatively new to his position, and they hadn't had a trout biologist for about 10 years, just because of budgetary restrictions. And he said, I've had all these things on my plate, but I'm finally getting to the point where I'm going to try to catalog and update where all the brook trout streams are. And I had, since the beginning of me being in this position, I thought maybe there were some fishermen I could recruit. And, I don't know which of us was more excited. I had this huge database, and he had a huge database, and was about to start, electroshocking streams and working on his, and I'm constantly working. So anyway, we're in close contact now, and swapping emails and data all the time now. So we'll see where that goes. And that for the past 3 years, as I've been working on this, I've thought, I'm building this database that I really can't share with anyone, because I can't, you can't publish the names of these streams, and they're just a little too fragile. But hopefully some good will come of it, because it's really hard work, and it's a big effort. And so this is finally, hitting a biologist who is really curious, and he's trying to work through the genetics of the different streams and things like that. So anyway, there's finally some good is going to come of it, I think, rather than just me hitting a personal goal.
So was your goal, when you met up with him, with a database under your belt, just to, I know I talk about this sometimes, like referring to hunting, where you don't want to just call someone up and ask where to go. You kind of want to come in showing that you've already done a little bit of legwork. Was that kind of your goal here, to prove that you're not just some Joe Schmo off the street who wants the answers to where all the brook trout are, and show that, you've done the legwork, you just want some verification and, a little bit of help from the biologist?
Yeah, exactly. I definitely wouldn't have reached out if I wasn't as far along as I am, and even the original Forest Service ranger, I wouldn't have followed up on that introduction to the guy I met alongside of the road if at that point I was probably 50. I found Brook Trout on probably 50 streams, and his database was, it's probably 20 years out of date and a little less accurate. But in that, spending time with him, there were a few streams that I had crossed off, and he was like, "No, you need to go back and you need to refish that one because I'm sure they're brook trout." And he was right. And that's the same thing has happened a little bit with the guy from the DNR, but we're still kind of comparing notes.
So do any of these streams, are there any that aren't named or are not even like really documented? Have you come across one out in the field that you look on a map and it's just not there?
No, I've never found one that's not on a map at all. There are very few. There's maybe 3 in my database that are unnamed tributaries. And that kind of raises the question of a couple different paths we can head down. One is, topo maps, and the other is you've got streams that have brook trout, but then separate populations. One of the big themes from that Zach Matthews article was you've got these isolated populations. So if you've got a stream and there are brook trout above 3,000 feet and above a barrier where no other fish can get up to them, that little population is completely cut off of every other brook trout population out there. And that's why he named the article, the loneliest brook trout in the world is these little remote populations that are just by themselves. And that's what the DNR biologist is trying to get at, is checking the DNA of those and seeing how much they differ. You might have a population that's been isolated for 300 years that has developed its own little DNA. But then there are other ones on my list that, you'll have a stream that has brook trout in it, and then 2 tributaries, and all 3 of those streams can intermix. So if I've got, 74 brook trout streams that I've found, so, confirmed, and there's probably 45 different populations in that. So there's some group that can intermix, but some groups that are isolated. One of the coolest streams I found is it's an unnamed tributary of a stream that holds brook trout, but this tributary flows down into basically a swamp, and it's on the map as connecting with the mainstream, but it's not even a trickle, even at pretty high water, and we've had a really rainy. It rained 100 inches last year in the area I'm talking about, so we've had high water. You never see where you basically that tributary never connects with the main river. It just comes down into the swamp and is sort of absorbed. But when you get higher up on that stream, they're brook trout. So even though that's a tributary of another brook trout stream, it's this totally isolated little population. Maybe if it was really flooding, some of those brook trout could wash down into the mainstream, or maybe a fish could swim up into there. But yeah, it's cool.
Do you ever find other species in these creeks? Or, I mean, obviously, if something like a rainbow or a brown came in, I'm sure the brook trout population probably wouldn't last too long. But do you ever catch little chubs or anything?
So one great indicator that there probably aren't brook trout is if you catch chubs, because chubs are going to be, you see chubs mixed with rainbows all the time, and maybe even brown trout, but I never ever see them mixed in with brook trout. I think the brook trout need just like a notch colder water. There's a couple streams that have brown trout and brook trout mixed together, and there's 2 I think in my database that have rainbows and brook trout mixed together. But generally, and all those 40 whatever that I scratched, mean, maybe a third of those I didn't find anything at all, and 2/3 I probably found mostly
And that was going to be
rainbows.
my next question. How long will you fish a stream and not catch anything before you chalk it up to there's nothing in here versus maybe you just haven't gotten to the right spot yet or you just haven't seen any?
And I'll give it a hard effort. So I'll fish a stream all the way up to where it sort of disintegrates, and it sort of splinters it near its headwater spring. I mean, I've had streams that I've fished as many as 4 times, which is 4 days, looking for brook trout before I've given up. There are other ones that you just get on it, it just feels immediately like everything's
Oh,
wrong.
okay.
But yeah, I'll give it a pretty hard go before I'll give up on it. And I've gotten better, in the last 3 years. I've gotten a lot better at it too. Some of the ones that I'll eventually go refish that I had scratched off the list, I just feel like I'm better at knowing where I'm going to find them, and everything about my technique and equipment, everything's just better. It's kind of like a miner, going back and mining an old claim with modern technology or something like that.
So, do you go back and fish ones that you've caught brook trout in again, or is that kind of like a checkbox and you move on, and you'll go back to ones that you haven't caught them to try to see if you just missed something, or you go back to ones that you fished just to catch fish again?
There, if a stream that I've caught brook trout in is near a stream where I'm spending a lot of time and I've got an extra hour or two, I'll definitely stop and refish a stream. Or maybe if I fished it in the dead of winter and caught one brook trout, maybe I'll go back in June, prime season, and refish it. But generally I'm moving
Okay.
on.
And what about in the same day? Like if you, I mean, obviously you're probably going for a couple hours and I'm not assuming that you catch one and leave, but have you had any where you catch one and then, you don't catch anything else, but you still chalk it up as a win? Or is your goal kind of to consistently catch fish out of one before you consider it, a solid brook trout stream?
Now I'll if it's a nice stream and I'm enjoying fishing it, I'll fish it for several
Okay.
hours. If it's a total nightmare of like rhododendron and brush, and if I usually like to at least catch two, but there are definitely ones on my list where I've only caught one. Those are largely ones I hit in the winter, but I like to at least get a couple. And if it's a nice stream, I'll keep going. It's some of the streams lend themselves, or you'll have a group of streams right together, and so there are days when I'll get, I've gotten a couple or even 3 streams in one day. That's rare, but that definitely has happened too, which it helps offset some of the 4 days on one
Right.
stream with nothing to show for it.
That article you sent from Zach Matthews, have you fished? Do you know like where he was, and have you fished any of those areas?
I do. It took a while to figure out which stream it was, but I definitely did. It's it's not the southernmost brook trout stream in Georgia, and I think he'll admit to that too. There are some that are further south, but I definitely found it. I had brought a copy of the article with me with pictures and kind of verified the spots, and it is. I mean, he talks about in the article that it's a great brook trout stream, and it really is. It's an all-star stream. It's bigger than most of them. It's got a great healthy population. It's a really good
Yeah,
one.
I really enjoyed the
And there,
article. It was I liked the
yeah,
pictures, I
yeah,
liked the writing, and I saw one of the comments on it said that someone had kept coming back to read it every year, and I think I might be one of those people now too.
yeah. It's definitely motivating. And there are other. So there's probably 10, at least the ones I've found, 10 just great brook trout streams that are pretty, decent size and kind of open and easy to move up on, where they've got big, healthy populations where you'll, on a good day, you can get 10 brook trout in an hour, and some on the bigger size, which might be 8 inches or something. I mean, they're still small. So there's some really good streams and where the access isn't too bad. But there's, of the however many days I've done this now, I've seen one person one time. I mean, literally. I mean, I go every single day. I go do this. I never see a single person from when I walk away from the car to when I get back to the car.
Was it shocking when you came across someone?
It was so early in it. It was maybe the third stream I got that I didn't really realize how rare that was. And it's a stream that's better known and has really, really easy access. There's basically a Forest Service road that goes alongside of it, and it's right in the middle of really close to the Appalachian Trail, and right in the middle of lots of other good streams and things like that. So it's, in hindsight, it's not terribly surprising. That one also, someone sent me a picture of a natural tiger trout. That's one of the ones that's got a few brown trout mixed in, and I was shocked to see a natural tiger trout. That
you
was
caught
really
one?
cool. But that was it.
Oh,
No, a friend of mine did and sent me a picture of it. But it was for that stream where I saw the person. But I just go day after day up there without seeing anybody. And when you're doing it, I joke that, I mean, these streams are so small and so tight and so hard to fish that hardly anyone wants to do it. This project, I joke that it's become a way to catch a ton of tiny rainbow trout, while experiencing the absolute worst fly fishing in Georgia. I mean, I use a 6.5-foot rod. I get suited up when I'm leaving the car just because it's so dense. So if I can possibly help it, I don't wear waders. There's maybe 3 months out of the year where I have to wear waders, but I'll, even when it's mid-December, I've got, wading boots with gravel guards and then a heavy pair of neoprene socks on the inside of that. And then on top of that, I wear snake gaiters, which in the winter, when snakes are down, is just to protect my legs. But, all these streams are snake infested and you can't see the ground when you're walking through the brush. I've got knee pads on, camo shirt. And then I've got, all my fishing stuff I keep in a really small chest pack. I really just have one box of flies, a spool of 5X tippet, nippers, things like that, some floating, but hardly any fishing stuff. And I'm almost always fishing. I have three different variations of common flies that I fish. Dry flies. One I call an LA special, which is a Los Angeles. Well, let me go to the first one. My true confidence fly is a variation of a pink post parachute Adams, where I tie it. I have what I call a jog bra tie, where if you envision a runner with a fluorescent pink jog bra and a heather gray tank top over it, you can see kind of the pink hue coming through the heather gray, and around the fringes you can see some pink. And so when I tie my jog bra, I call it my jog bra 3PA. 3PA is the pink post parachute Adams. I use fluorescent orange thread, and I use regular gray dubbing, but I dub it kind of lightly so you can see the pink hues come through. And then when I whip finish it and things like that, you obviously have like a tiny little pink hot spot up on the head. So I fish that 75% of the time. Then I have another parachute Adams variation that I call an LA special, Los Angeles special, which Dave Whitlock had written something I read that said brook trout are attracted mostly to orange, or more to orange than any other color. I have no reason to doubt him, and I would rely on him more than me. So I started tying very similar with an orange post, but the part of the fly in front of the post I dub with orange dubbing instead of gray dubbing, so it's got a bigger hot spot. And then a classic brook trout fly is an sable wolf, and I tie that with the wings. I make them orange, and I use still a rust orange, but it looks much more orangey than rust colored and I call that a lone wolf. And part of the bright colored posts and wings are you're so deeply in the shade, it really, really helps to be able to see the fly.
Isn't that like the best thing about brook trout, that you don't need to take a lot? When you were talking about how you only carry basically a handful of flies with you, and I swear I need to trim my fly pack down, because every time I go out, I'm usually there's multiple species that I may encounter, and my mindset is always like, I need to have my entire collection just in case. And then inevitably when I go after brook trout, like all I use is a parachute Adams, and I question why I'm still lugging around all my flies when I pull the same one out every single time.
That's exactly right. And some of these fish, may not have seen it. I mean, it sounds like I'm exaggerating, but I've hit plenty of streams that I don't think anyone's fished in years. And the fish are so aggressive. I mean, they're not very, like a typical freestone, they're not very fertile streams. And so you can cast to a brook trout and it may be the fourth cat. I mean, they may hit your fly 4 times before they finally hook up, but unless you truly prick them, they're not going to give up on your fly. And it really doesn't matter that much. If it's raining or something, maybe I'll throw a foam beetle just because it's easier to keep floating. And occasionally when a stream will be big enough that I'll drop like an unweighted hare's ear pheasant tail nymph off of it. But yeah, it's not complicated. It's hard to find the fish and it's hard to get into them. But once you're there, if you can cast into a pool or a pocket, you're going to pretty much know that fish are there. But then so that's the fish, the fishing gear. And then I've got a couple different short rods, but my go-to is like a 6.5 foot medium kind of action 3-weight. I'm always surprised when I look at rods that are available by different manufacturers that more people don't have 6.5 foot 3-weights. It seems like everyone you talk to says, small streams, you can still be throwing bigger flies, so you should go with a 3-weight instead of a 2-weight. But everything under 7.5 foot seems to be 2-weights these days. And I've got a shorter fiberglass rod that is fun, but I think everyone should try fishing with a fiberglass rod, just like a 10-car rod. It's just fun, but it's not really a go-to. And people on small streams tend to go with really soft rods, just, the concept that they'll load a lot better, they're with these really short casts. But something that Dave Hughes had written in a book about small streams, he had this theory that you want a bit faster rods, so you can throw tighter loops and get them into narrower places. And I 100% agree with that. I think it's really easy to go too soft on a rod. One of the rods I have, is much faster. Sage makes a rod called a Dart that's like a super fast 6.5 foot 3-weight. And that might be a little overdone, but half or more of your casts are going to be bow and arrow casts, and you can sling a tight bow and arrow loop a really long way with that rod. It's super impressive. And those are the techniques, right? Your bow and arrow casting, your dapping is probably a little overrated, but it definitely works, sometimes. And it saves some days for me. Your roll casting, and occasionally, once in a great while, you'll have enough room to actually do like a real cast. But that's kind of what you're up against. I've become if you if you bow and arrow cast enough, I find sometimes, when I could make a regular cast or a roll cast, I'll just like instinctively go to like a really long bow and arrow cast. Joe Humphreys has an awesome video on the proper way to bow and arrow cast, which I think everyone should look at. If you go to YouTube and Google Joe Humphreys bow and arrow cast, you'll see it. But most people try to hold the fly, and they just don't get the distance or the accuracy that they need.
I think the whole topic of fast versus a slow rod on those small streams, and how a lot of people tend to associate smaller streams with slower action rods. I wonder if that kind of comes from the fact that you are fishing it sounds like a very tightly forested area versus something like the high country of California where there's just a meadow stream. I feel like that would be better for a slow action rod where you don't need to make the pinpoint precision casts. You're just getting the fly on the water. I think that's where I would take a slow action rod. But where you are, it sounds like 1 inch to the right and you're caught up in a tree branch, which is probably why you need that faster action. You say that's accurate?
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. It's not like you're trying to make a soft presentation on really still water.
Right.
So, the water's, these are tumbling streams for the most part. Even the slower section, there's usually decent current. So you don't need that slow action to deliver a dry fly, really lightly onto the water.
Do you find that when you show up, that if there are brook trout, that you tend to find them right away? Like, what's the longest you've fished before you found one?
2 miles.
Okay. And how far up have you hiked? I know you said you go up to, basically the headwaters or the spring that forms these creeks, but what's your average, or what's the farthest that you've had to go up to reach that point?
It's probably not, from where I would start fishing, it's probably not much more than a couple miles.
Okay.
There's a huge variation. I mean, some of the streams you might have to hike 3 miles to get to, the elevation and where you think and this is what I've gotten better at. I used to just start at the bottom, where a tributary hit a main river and just battle my way from the bottom to the top. Now I, figure a way in from the side and hit it at a higher elevation where, I think I'm more likely to find brook trout. But you might have a 3 mile hike to get in, or you might, park the car where it crosses underneath a Forest Service road and just start right up. I mean, there's some that, there are plenty of streams I've caught brook trout within sight of, my car, and there's plenty of others that it's been way, way up there. And it takes a really long time. I mean, the woods are so dense, and you're constantly climbing over and under, and you're pouring sweat. I mean, it's a battle moving up these streams. So to go a mile takes several hours to fish a mile worth. And you usually, you kind of have frequently have the same battle just getting back to the car too. Now you can, what I call the rhododendron line. The streams are for the most part just encased in rhododendron, and when you finish, you're fishing upstream, and when you finish fishing, you can climb, 100 yards up the hillside to get above where the rhododendron is, or 75 yards or whatever, and then start trying to make your way back downhill. And I do things like when I'm researching a stream, there's a bunch of topo maps that I'll kind of cross-reference. So I don't know if you're familiar with Topo Zone. Topo Zone is awesome. You can get on there and find a stream, and then there are two different topo maps. One's a Forest Service version, and one is, I don't know, another version. And then it also has the same sort of Google map format, and then a satellite a Google satellite image too, and you can zoom in on an area and then toggle back and forth between all four of those, and you can get a really great uh, view of what you're coming up against when you're going to fish that stream. And then there's another program called CalTopo, which does a better job of having hiking trails and things like that.
Okay.
It'll often have things that you won't find on Topo Zone. And then a Garmin, the regular Garmin GPS will often have a trail or have something that those other two don't have. So I'll cross check with my GPS as well. It's you, and then I don't know. Do you know Stream Maps? Stream Maps is
No.
it's an app for your phone that is incredible for searching. You can pick a state and then search for the name of a stream, and it'll pull it right up, and it'll have it color coded in one color, and the streams it flows into are color coded in another color. It's an amazing app that and you kind of, if you to do this project, you sort of have to have a love for maps, which sounds totally nerdy, but if I'm sitting around like waiting for a dentist appointment, I'm probably like pulling out my phone and scanning on stream maps, to look at where I might be fishing next weekend. You have to be completely obsessed with maps to make all this really work, to find the streams and figure out the access and figure out the best way in. I mean, it may be as simple as there's a stream and a ravine behind or below a dirt road, and if you look at a satellite image, you can pick out where there's less just heavy vegetation. It's just maybe like pine trees or something,
Mm-hmm.
and follow. Then you end up driving to that point and picking that path of least resistance, and heading downhill for half a mile till you hit the stream. Versus if you picked a more vegetated area, it'd be a huge battle to get down through all that mess.
Yeah, I've definitely been in the same boat with the mapping and the maps not agreeing. I haven't used the resources that you've mentioned, but I generally have the same problem where I'll have 3 or 4 different mapping programs or trail apps or things like that all together, and then have to piece together the trail because each one only has a portion of it, and then you get there and it doesn't match one, or the trail just disappears and it says it was there because it used to be there. And I think that's half the fun, is just trying to figure it out, because I think it's exciting when I come across areas like that, because I know that it's probably not heavily trafficked, because anywhere that's
Yeah,
heavily trafficked is going to be well documented.
yeah, and that's the CalTopo. The trails that are on there are definitely trails that are used a lot more often. But people still aren't taking those trails into fish areas. But I agree with you. It's really, that's part of the cool part about all this, is all the exploration. Then finally, Saturday morning you get to go and actually see what's really there, and see if your premise on how you're going to access that stream really works out, and if there really are brook trout down there.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
It's like Christmas every
yeah,
Saturday.
yeah. It's really, it's all the catch. A 6-inch brook trout. It's It's cool though. And there's another aspect that we haven't talked about at all that I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, is there's a big sort of backwoods travel safety aspect that shouldn't, anyone who wants to do this shouldn't hold back on at all. You're heading into areas, you're losing cell coverage several miles before you ever leave your car. And then you're heading in areas where there, you know, all kinds of snakes. There's bears, there's wild pigs, and you're like climbing through brush and up and over, falling down trees. Maybe a tornado went through an area and you've got to go through a whole tornado mess. We're in Georgia, there are tornadoes. And so you're always going to fall. I don't think I've ever gone out where I haven't fallen, maybe even a couple of times, including like falling, 10 feet down a waterfall that I was like halfway up in the old rock climbing experience. comes in, but it turns out wading boots don't have the same grip on wet algae covered rock as sticky rubber does on clean granite. So I have my fishing gear in the small chest bag, but then I've got pretty much all the time I've got a backpack that has bear spray in it. It's got this little survival pack that's got stuff like a flashlight and a space blanket and some fire starters and a whistle and some real basic stuff like that, but pretty compact. Water bottle and food. And then instead of a first aid kit, I carry a trauma pack. I don't know if you're familiar with those.
No.
It's about the size of like the size of a first aid kit you would bring, but it has sponges soaked with a chemical that will help stop bleeding and compression bandages. So it's the theory is that the average first aid kit that a hiker is going to have solves problems that can pretty much wait. It solves cuts and scrapes and headaches and bee stings. But problems that can't wait, like you slice an artery.
Mm-hmm.
That's what a trauma pack solves. They're light. They don't take up much room. They're not that expensive. You can get them on Amazon.
So do you take that in addition to typical first aid things like bandages and gauze, or is that just a replacement and you figure if you scrape an arm that you'll just rub some dirt in it and wait it out?
Yeah, exactly. That's a replacement. I mean, in that little survival pack, there are a couple of gauze bandages, but there's very little, maybe a roll of first aid tape. But basically, I'm relying on the trauma pack. And then the other like really important thing is PLB. I don't know if you're familiar with those, a personal locator beacon.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a satellite activated system where you buy the unit, there's no subscription fee or anything like that. And it really just has like one big button on it that if you register it, every couple of years, you have to go back and re-register with your contact information. But if you become incapacitated, you pull it out and hit that button and it sends an emergency signal with your GPS coordinates, and just transmits for the next 30 hours. And that gets to, if I leave my car at, 7:30 in the morning and am a mile and a half up a stream, and break my leg at 10, my wife generally knows where I'm going, but I change, sometimes the road is closed or, I change a lot too. You don't necessarily stick to the original plan. So it's not, at 5:00, if I haven't called her and said I'm almost home, she's calling me to ask where I am. And, at 5:30, she's going to call me again. And, this time be, really mad.
Yeah.
And, maybe it's 6 or 6:30, she's going to realize there's a problem and start trying to figure out where I am or who to call. And I'm basically spending the night, before someone has any hope of finding me. Whereas with this, if I break my leg at 10, at 10:01, there's a signal going out. Here's where he is. And he's got a problem and has to be rescued. So and because I'm always alone, I think that's just hugely important.
Yeah.
That, the bear spray and, there's one kind of North Georgia tip, if you're moving up a stream and the water suddenly gets cloudy, like it rained, but level doesn't come up. There's a herd of pigs, somewhere not too far above you.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they make a total mess, and bears, pigs, snakes, and then honestly, the only thing that's really hurt me is 3 different times I've walked through yellow jacket nests. Each time good for 8 to 12 stings, and that's. But I'm always really wary about pigs and bears. Bears pretty much are heading the other way if they see you.
Have you ever had an encounter with a bear or anything while you're out?
The only bear one so I've seen several bears, and they've all been heading in the other direction. Except one time I was heading in to fish a stream, and the road had washed out in a heavy rainstorm, so the road was closed. So I was mountain biking in. It was like 4 miles in, which is awesome. If you ever see a closed road, it means you've got like this whole wilderness to yourself if you're willing to go in there. And so I started mountain biking in real early. It was in the winter, so it wasn't like that early. And I could just start seeing, I could see the road totally fine, but just start seeing into the woods. And the road was on a big, big slope where it dropped off dramatically below me. And I saw ahead of me this like jet black thing moving up a tree. And I was like, what is that thing? And I got closer and closer and realized it was a bear cub. And it was like a nature film where, you're taking a picture up from a tree canopy because the tree was down below me. And I never saw the mama bear, but I'll tell you, Lance Armstrong, fully juiced up, couldn't have beaten me out of there. Um, but pigs, I accidentally cornered a herd of maybe 20 pigs one time. They saw me and headed up what turned out to be kind of like a dead end, and they had a bunch of pigs are like the opposite of bears. Bears, if they've got a cub there, that's when you have to worry. Pigs, if they've got like those little wiener pigs with them, they're just trying to herd them away from you. They have no interest in you. They're just trying to get away from you. And so this herd of pigs had to come back like right past me to get out of, they had just worked themselves in this corner. And then a couple other times I've come across like single adult pigs who've stopped and like squared up to me, but have always moved on eventually.
Yeah, we don't have any of that up here. Just bears.
Yeah,
bears and I guess mountain lions, but I don't think you guys have any of those over there, do you?
We have, North Georgia might have 20 mountain lion sightings a year,
really?
which is dramatically fewer than the Sasquatch sightings. So I'm sure we have 200 Sasquatch sightings.
We have quite a few of those up here too.
Yeah, you're right, exactly. And then the snakes are, it's just so, the snake gator is just critical, and wearing full like boots. In the summer, Sims makes this boot that is designed to wear with bare feet, but it's like a full wading boot.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's a little cooler, you can fit like a thin pair of neoprene socks inside of that. So in the summer, I'll wear those, but it's a full boot, and then it's got the snake gator on top of that. And then as it gets colder, I'll switch over to like regular wading boots, as I mentioned, with the gravel guards and the neoprene socks kind of layered up. And that's good till, it can be raining and 40 degrees, and it'll feel totally fine. Particularly maybe not in the end of February when the water's colder, but in the December, it feels totally fine wading wet like that. And the waders just the waders I do wear when I wear them are just the waist high ones. They're still hot and they're still constrict movement, and you're tearing them up. When I first started getting holes in my waders, I would get Aqua Seal and carefully search out each hole and dab some Aqua Seal on it, and then now I just turn them inside out and go buy a big tube of silicone seal at the hardware store and put a big bead of silicone seal along the inside of the shins and knees and seat and smear it around with like a plastic butter knife. And you just rip everything up and all that, all the briars and stuff like that.
I first started.
Go ahead. Another great tip, my own invention, but I'm sure Patagonia and Orvis and Sims will have their own items out after this podcast comes out. In the winter, I'll wear what I call rain shorts, where I take a pair of rain pants and, not ones with zippers down the side, but just cheap rain pants, and cut them off at the knees. And so if it's raining, if it's 40 degrees and raining, you're wading wet. If you pull those on, it makes all the difference in the world.
That's a really good idea. I'd never thought of that before, but yeah, your feet in the water will be basically protected from getting cold once they get used to it, right? And then that just keeps your upper legs dry. Is that the goal?
Yeah, keeps your everything from the waist down dry. I mean, you've got a raincoat on, and the raincoat I wear is a little bit oversized, so it fits over the chest pack, so that's protected. And then the backpack, I mean, given how much it rains, the 100 inches last year, I've got a waterproof backpack, so everything can be sealed up there. So with a raincoat and that, and then by pulling the rain pants on, keeps your shorts dry and everything. I mean, it's so dense and sort of loamy, and it's just if you're up there in the when it's raining, it's filthy dirty too. It's you're everything's wet and dirty, and you're slipping and sliding down this like loamy soil, and it's, I mean, I have the clothes I wear when I fish are they're permanently stained, dirt colored. It's never coming out.
Well, I'm not jealous of I've been jealous of most of what you've been talking about today, but I'm not jealous of the amount of rain you get there, it sounds like.
I know it's, and if you were to ask me my ideal fishing day, it'd be out west without a rhododendron or tree in sight.
The grass is always greener.
Yeah.
Well, Palmer, we've been going for over an hour now, so I can let you get going, but I'm excited to hear how the rest of this brook trout project goes. You say you're around 70 streams right now?
Yeah, 74, and there's no right now I believe I'll end up over 90, and I don't know if there's any chance I'll get to 100. I mean, I've got a lot on my list that are pretty high likelihood targets, so I'm pretty confident I'll get over 90. And honestly, when I hit that, then it gets super interesting, because then it's really even getting further off the grid and really exploring and finding streams that are even more remote and things like that. So I have a long way ahead of me.
Yeah, I think it sounds like it'll just get, I mean, more and more challenging, but probably more and more fun too, as you start to find more of your own streams that haven't been documented yet, or don't have names, or just take tributaries up and things like that.
And there are a lot like that too. I mean, there's a bunch of streams on my list that they do have names, but I never found I've never found a single mention of brook trout in all my searches, and I've never found anyone who thought there were brook trout on them. So there's some, and those are obviously the coolest ones.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, the self-discovery.
Do you know how many streams you get on average each year?
So last year I fished more than I would have, only because it rained so much. So a lot of the other fishing I would have done was blown out. So I hit the mountains more, which you can fish in higher water a little better. And I think I got 30 or so last year, and I'm probably ahead of that pace this year right now.
Well, maybe we can check back in like a year and see how this year and the beginning of next year like stacks up to previous years, if you'd be open to that.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'll definitely keep you informed, and spending time with this Department of Natural Resource biologist will add a whole nother element too. So that's just beginning.
Very cool. All right, well, I will let you get going, but look forward to keeping in touch and hopefully checking back in. We could talk about this stuff all night, so I think we'll tune back in another time and hear what's new then.
Perfect, and thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. This has been great. And that's a wrap on episode number 3. As always, if you liked what you heard, go ahead and go over to the Wild Initiative podcast. You can subscribe there. You'll get my show every Thursday, as well as all of Sam's other shows throughout the week. You can also follow me on Instagram at Fish Untamed, or on Go Wild at my name, Katie Bergert. And until next time, take care.